Today, we are diving deep into a major development that signals a turning point in the geopolitical struggle between freedom and tyranny. Putin's aggression has hardly been thwarted in the past, but with America electing President Trump, his bold leadership is actually weakening Russia and strengthening Ukraine. And we're going to talk about how and why. The United States will provide Ukraine intelligence to strike deep inside Russia, targeting key energy infrastructure. This is a move that could cripple Vladimir Putin's war machine and shift the balance of power in this conflict for the balance of the war. First, let us acknowledge the obvious. Putin is struggling. Despite massive resources and brutal tactics, Russia is not marching towards victory right now. The Russian economy is strained, its infrastructure is under relentless attack, and its people are suffering under sanctions and energy shortages. Ukraine, with Western backing, has chipped away at Russia's vulnerabilities, especially energy supply lines, which are central to Putin's control and revenue. Recent strikes on Russian energy infrastructure have disrupted nearly 40% of the country's oil refining capacity. That is a serious blow to Russia's ability to fuel its military and power its domestic industries. Putin's grip on domestic stability is also threatened as gasoline shortages rise because of the war and crippling sanctions. Russia's gasoline exports are at their lowest since 2020, amid attacks on refineries, pipelines, power stations, and other infrastructure deep inside Russian territory. Putin's troops will not be able to be sustained at the front if demands for supply are not answered soon. But these indications tell us that Russia is no longer the unstoppable juggernaut. And America, with President Trump, have a strategic opportunity to exploit them in alliance with Ukraine. Under President Trump, the U.S. is stepping up in a way that demonstrates bold leadership rather than standing by. Trump has allowed the Pentagon and U.S. intelligence agencies to support long-range missile strikes by Ukraine inside Russia, which could lead to targeting Russian energy sites in the future. It is a decisive escalation in strategic assistance. The logic behind the move is clear because by helping Ukraine hit the sources of Russia's war funding, such as supply lines, then the infrastructure that keeps Vladimir Putin's war machine alive will start to collapse for good. The U.S. is considering the idea of supplying Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine with a range over 1,500 miles, which could put much of Russia within reach. That means Ukraine would no longer be on the defense alone. It could strike deep into Russia to degrade the adversary's ability to project power. This has already been seen in recent weeks with unexpected assassinations of Russian military officers and drone attacks on fuel facilities that were previously believed to be in a safe zone for Russia. But this is how leadership works, and this is how you shift the momentum of the war. Putin's aggression cannot go unanswered, which is why the United States is working with Ukraine to develop the capability to hit back on Russia and do real damage to their supply lines and military equipment. And Ukraine is not passive in this. They're obviously fighting courageously on the front lines. They are smart about leveraging intelligence, drones, missile strikes, targeting key nodes. The added U.S. support greatly enhances their capacity. With U.S. intel and possibly Tomahawk missiles, Ukraine can go after refineries, pipelines, power stations, and other potential targets inside of Russia. Successful attacks would force disruptions in oil, military logistics, and military equipment. Ukraine has already struck at least a dozen of Russia's oil refineries. That scale of these attacks have ripple effects that span the entire Russian military. Diesel shortages are hurting Russian military mobility near the front line, while agriculture and grain exports are likewise impacted. Russia's economy, already under sanctions, now faces compounding blows as the U.S. places additional pressure on Putin's war machine. And to make matters worse for Putin, Ukraine is gaining momentum, thanks to high-level intelligence sharing with the United States. Not only does this increase precision, but it restores deterrence. It sends a message that aggression is costly. If Ukraine can maintain pressure deep inside Russia, then Putin will be forced to divert resources to defend its infrastructure, which would drain its capacity to concentrate power on the front lines of the invasion. So what does this mean for Putin and Russia? Well, in the immediate future, it means that Russia can no longer operate with impunity deep inside Ukraine without risk of blowback. It means that infrastructure long considered safe behind the lines is now vulnerable to Putin. Putin's propaganda about inevitable conquest loses credibility when citizens face gas shortages and when supply routes are compromised. This will only get worse as his economy continues to tank into a recession. The state control he relies on becomes unstable under internal pressure, and we're starting to see that right now. As Russia reallocates forces to defend itself from vulnerabilities that Ukraine is planning to exploit, Russia's offensive capability weakens significantly. Putin's war machine is not indefinite because it does depend on fuel, maintenance, morale, and equipment. Those are now under real threats from Ukraine, and Tomahawk missile deployments would probably intimidate Putin even more than he already is. By equipping Ukraine and providing intelligence, America is investing in its own national interests, because there are strategic reasons that the United States would not like to see Russia claim large amounts of Ukrainian territory. Some will oppose deeper involvement, arguing the risk is too high or fearing escalation. These are valid concerns because it would not be the first time that America gets dragged into a never-ending war. But America would not be fighting Russia directly on land. The U.S. would exclusively be enhancing the offensive capacity of Ukraine to degrade aggressor capability. But the Kremlin would likely not see things in the same light. Putin could perceive such a move as a declaration of war, and there is a chance that the United States would then be directly at war with Russia. This would potentially initiate the prerequisites for World War III to begin. So this is what some observers would argue is the reason to limit the amount of assistance that the US gives Ukraine during this conflict. So what comes next on the battlefield? It's possible that the US will deploy Tomahawks or alternative long-range capabilities to Ukraine. Then the US could potentially expand intelligence sharing for deep strikes across Russian infrastructure. This would probably send warning signs to Putin, who may be forced to reevaluate the situation. He could potentially be forced into negotiations to end the war at that point, but there's no guarantee he would instruct his military to react with force instead of diplomacy. The best plan would be to slowly deplete Russia's remaining supplies. This would harm its ability to wage war against Ukraine. Putin may have started the war counting on American weakness. This war started under the Biden administration, which took a far different posture towards the world than what we're seeing under the Trump administration. Under President Trump, America is reasserting leadership. This new move to share intelligence for deep strikes inside Russia could mark a turning point. It could be the moment where the tide turns sharply in favor of Ukraine. But Putin will still be willing to retaliate to any moves that temporarily stun his military. Looking to the future of this war, it is becoming more clear that Russia is in a downward spiral. Putin launched this invasion thinking he could just steamroll Ukraine in a matter of days, yet nearly 3 years later, he finds himself bogged down, isolated, and increasingly desperate. His military is bleeding resources and morale, and the Russian economy is cracking under sanctions and targeted strikes. The partnership between Ukraine and the United States is not just helping Ukraine survive. It is building momentum towards victory. With American intelligence, advanced weapons, and the willpower of the Ukrainian people, Russia's war machine is being chipped apart piece by piece. This war may not end tomorrow, but Putin's future is bleak. He is running out of options and out of time. So, as America steps up and Ukraine pushes forward, Putin is struggling, and the momentum is shifting away from Russia's grasp.